Hello, my name's Jade and today I'm going to be going through the books that I read in November. I read, I think seven books in November. One of them was a bit of a behemoth though that more or less took the whole month to read. But overall I'm pretty happy with that number. I read 4 novels, 2 novellas and 1 graphic novel, and there's definitely a theme in terms of genre. I got really into like mysteries this month, and I also really liked fantasy this month. Yeah. Let's get into the first book. The first book I've read this month was Girl 11 by Amy Suter Clarke. I listened to this one via audiobook, but I didn't have time to find out the audiobook narrators, so I will leave them on the screen. This is one of those true crime books that's like part podcast, and so like the audiobook has like podcast snippets in it, which is really cool. I love me a book with a podcast. This book we're following Elle, and Elle is like an independent investigator essentially, slash podcaster. She used to work with social services, trying to like help kids get out of bad situations and stuff. And then something happened and she had a career change and turned into a private investigator who podcasts her private investigations. Often they're relating to kids. She had something happen to her in her past that's kind of really inspired her. And in this book, she's investigating the Countdown Killer, a serial killer from I think it was the 90s, and so time has passed since then, and some people speculate that maybe they're dead, but Elle doesn't think so. Elle thinks they're still out there, and she thinks that she wants to find him, she wants to get him. And the Countdown Killer, the reason like it's called Girl 11 is because he would take girl slash woman, I think the oldest was like 20, like, and then 18, and then 19, and then so on and so forth up until 11. 11 was the last one that happened. It was definitely really addictive and really fun in terms of like a listening experience because of that podcast element. I really wanted to kind of figure out what was going on. There were definitely like a few clues laid down on the table. Partway through there, like another mystery comes up and it's like, are they connected? Maybe they are, maybe they're not. Who knows? And also because Elle has this like past, her emotional journey and her like emotional attachment to the case is particularly interesting, and the way the people around her react to her because of that, like it's an interesting story. It adds this extra layer. I will say the writing, it was a little bit like on the simplistic side, maybe a little bit repetitive, and we kept having these like really long like internal monologues with like Elle just thinking everything over, and it kind of got repetitive, like she'd think the same things over and over again, and she was just like really like, it was overwritten. Definitely there were times where she was like over explaining things that like I didn't need that to be explained for as long as it was, and I really just wanted to get back into the action of it. And so I think mostly because of that, like it's not left a super strong impression in my mind. Like when I think about it, I just think that was like a really fun, entertaining read. Like I definitely enjoyed it. It was entertaining, it was addictive. I wanted to figure out what was going on, but I don't think it's the best like true crime book, or not like even the best true crime podcast book I'd ever read. But the next book I will talk about will like go even further into why I find it really hard not to compare this author to Courtney Summers. So let's get into the next book I finished this month. The next book I finished was Lay Your Body Down by Amy Suter Clarke. This is, I think, her most recent release. I think she's only written the 2, if I'm not mistaken. Both of them are on Scribd, the audiobooks. So if you have Scribd and you want to listen to them, you can find them there. I listened to this one via audio as well, and I liked like the narration for both of these was fine. I think the first one was maybe slightly more interesting as an audiobook just because of the podcast element, but this one was fine too. And so in Lay Your Body Down, it's more of like a culty situation, which if you know Courtney Summers, we have Sadie, which is this like true crime podcast book, and then after that she released The Project, which is this culty book. And so because of that like trajectory, and because I loved The Project so hard, like trying not to compare them just like became a little bit difficult to me. But anyway, it is very different to The Project. They're structurally similar, like thematically, but the actual premises, the actual plots are very different now. This one's more of like evangelical, okay. So we're reading from Delle's point of view, and Delle used to live in this small town. She moved away, she started a new life, and then someone from her past dies, her ex-boyfriend dies. And so she wants to go back and kind of figure out what happened to him. And part of the reason she left was due to this church. The church is called Messiah, and it's really like has really strong grips in the town. Like a lot of the town go to this church, and town and the church are one and the same pretty much. She didn't have the best experience there. Something happened again in her past. The teachings of this church are a little questionable. In particular, there's a movement called the Good Wife movement, I believe it's called, or the Loyal Wife movement, something to that effect. And we also see from Eve's perspective, and Eve is a blogger writing about this movement. And the pastor, Rick, I believe his name was, is kind of like teaching, I mean, he's teaching all the girls this, but they, you know, she particularly believed in him. And she's trying to spread the message of the Good Wife movement to the world. And Eve is actually the wife, well, I mean ex-wife of her ex-boyfriend that died, and so they are also like interlinked. And so the premise was so interesting. I loved everything, like exploring about the Good Wife movement and kind of like pulling it apart, and the way we pulled it apart was, I want surface level, not in that it wasn't interesting, not that we didn't kind of dismantle it properly, but surface level in that it was very on the nose. It was very obvious. It wasn't subtle in its dismantling at all. It was very kind of explanatory and telling us things. So I will say the writing of this one is pretty much the exact same as the writing in Girl 11. We still had those like really long inner monologues where the characters just thinking things over, and I'm just like, let's get doing things. In fact, I would say the clues in this one and the way like we piece the puzzle together, it's not as in-depth and intricate as it was in Girl 11. I think in my mind of the two, Girl 11 to me is the stronger book. It's the one that I probably also enjoyed more. But it's really frustrating because I love culty books. I love anything where we're kind of questioning people's beliefs and the power of belief and who we trust and who we, like that kind of stuff I find really interesting. Still on the whole enjoyed it. I'm so very glad to have read it. I'm still definitely going to look out for whatever this author puts out in the future. Oh, I never rated Girl 11. Okay, I would give Girl 11, I think like a 7 out of 10. I really enjoyed it, but like I don't think like the writing was in depth enough for it to be an 8. I think I'm also gonna give Lay Your Body Down a 7. I think it's a lower 7 than Girl 11. Girl 11 is like a mid 7, and then Lay Your Body Down is like a low 7. And then next up we have a duology. It's a cozy fantasy duology, so I'm kind of going to talk about them together. In fact, in the audiobook, which is what I listened to, again, narrator on screen, he did a fantastic job. The way he did the voices, and in particular one of the voices and the accent was so strong and so good. So I'm going to talk about them both here together. They're novellas, they're very short. And that is Silver in the Wood and Drowned Country by Emily Tesh. So this duology is the Green Hollow duology is what it's referred to. There is a wood called Green Hollow, funnily enough, and in this wood there are magical creatures, and in particular we follow, I think his name is Tobias. He kind of looks after the wood, and he's magical and he's kind of a part of the wood. I don't want to say any more than that because it's very like, it's very short. Like a part of it is like figuring out how and why and what's going on. And someone moves into the manor right next to the wood, in the woods, whatever, called Henry Silver. And he and Tobias strike up a little friendship. Yep. It's very short, and like it's not exactly that the stakes are low, but like the way it comes about towards the end, it does happen quite quickly. Like it does almost feel like quite half and half. But because it's so short, I don't really care, and because it's so cozy, I didn't really care. The writing's really, really lovely. It's really concrete, and there's a better way of saying easy to picture. It's very visual. You're really immersed. It's really immersive. That's the term I'm looking for. It's immersive. You're really there, and just the tone of it is really wholesome and lovely, and the way it's like emoted through the writing is really cleverly and subtly done. It feels like you're being enveloped in a warm hug in the best way. But the writing's also really lovely to read, so it's great. The premise of this woods and the backstory is really interesting, and the characters were so much fun. They had such a great personality. The way the narrator did Tobias and his voice was perfect. It was perfect. I loved Tobias so much. Silver was also so much fun. Just all the characters were great. I loved them, and their interactions were so much fun. It was just a really fun, happy book with an interesting premise, but they're very short. Yeah, I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10. It was such a lovely, fun little read, and it's definitely the kind of thing that I can see myself rereading in the future. And then the second book, Drowned Country, I mean, I can't really talk too much about the premise. I will say, if the first one is Tobias's pub, and then the second one is Henry's pub. Silver's perspective was so much fun. It was so interesting to see, and tonally they felt very, although they both had that cozy fantasy feeling, definitely the first one like definitely had that warm hug feeling, whereas Silver is a little more chaotic. He's a little snarkier. He's a lot funnier potentially. I think Drowned Country is probably funnier because you're in Silver's perspective, but it was really interesting the way they felt so distinct and yet they had the same overlying feel. I just think the writing was so well done. I know she's got another book coming out, Emily Tash. I think it might be sci-fi, and I cannot wait to read it because it's just so good. The writing was so good. There's just review on Goodreads. I actually think it's the top review on Goodreads for Drowned Country that I find so funny. I'm going to read it out to you. Drowned Country is about Henry Silver, and where Tobias Finch's voice in Silver in the Wood made me want to fold him in a big blanket, worn soft with many washings, and protect him from the ravages of the world. Henry Silver's voice made me want to put my head down on a table and possibly bang my forehead against it a few times. Which is like, I don't know if I'd go like that far, but it's very true. Like, Tobias is really old and so he has this like wisdom and this calmness to him that Henry has in no way, shape or form. It's just so fun to watch. The second one definitely has a much more adventurous feeling to it. There's also like more baggage in terms of like the relationships, so it has like this very different feeling to it because of that. I want to say that I enjoyed the first one more just because I loved that cozy tone of it, but the second one, like, the plot I think was much stronger and I loved how we ended it. I think I'd give both of them an 8 out of 10. I think it's a really lovely duology. If it sounds interesting to you too, then I highly recommend it. And then next up we have Eileen by Otessa Moshfeg. This is actually my first Otessa Moshfeg. I read it because the movie came out yesterday actually. I watched it yesterday, December 1st. I'm filming this on December 2nd. I don't know why I needed to explain that to you. My nan saw the trailer for it and mentioned it to me because it had Anne Hathaway in it. And the trailer did look really interesting. And so I thought, well, it's Otessa Moshfeg and I've not read an Otessa Moshfeg and this is her debut. It's got a lot of hype. I should probably read it first. And so that's what I did. I listened to the audiobook for this one as well. It is also on Scribd if you have Scribd. I have really mixed feelings about this one, in that I didn't personally enjoy reading it that much, but I think objectively, like, I think if you were to put this in a creative writing class, it would be so interesting to pull apart and figure out why the author did what she did, go through and look for the little clues and the little motifs and the foreshadowings. It would be a great book to study in class, I really think that. So it's one of those things, like, objectively, is it well done? Maybe. Or maybe not. Like, I think, like, the act of pulling it apart would be really interesting. If it's interesting enough to be interesting to pull apart, then there's something there. Even if you, on the outcome of that, I think, like, maybe it's not the, like, I don't like these decisions that she made. I wish, like, I think this could have been more interesting. I think this could have been more impactful. The fact that you wanted to pull it apart, still something was right. So in terms of the premise, I don't actually know how the book is synopsized because I watched the trailer and that's all I knew going into it. Following Eileen. Eileen's 24. She works at, like, it's a boys correction facility, like a prison for kids essentially, a prison for young boys. I think it takes place in the 50s. She lives with her dad who's an alcoholic, her mom has died, her sister's moved out. Very internal. We're watching how she lives in her life, and then a new woman comes to work at the prison and it changes things. That's all I'm gonna say, because the way the trailer made it out to be, and it's like the inciting incident, the things that kicks the book into gear is this woman joining the prison. That didn't happen until a third into the book. The first third was just Eileen wallowing, literally. Like, and we need, like, the before to see the after, I get that, but we don't need a third of the book's worth. It was losing me. It was losing me hardcore, and I think if it hadn't been for that first third of the book, in fact, my opinion could have been very different. Because when Rebecca, the new woman, came in and the plot really got kicked into gear, it did become much more interesting. The problem was, though, we kept having these, like, big fat sections of Eileen just wallowing again and again and again and again. It's also written retrospectively. It was written from her in the future, and that's made very clear from a very early stage, and she gives you these little snippets of, like, what her life is like now. And so because of that, I found it really hard to care what happened because I know how it ultimately ends up. I know what ultimately happens to her, more or less. The risk of, like, what will ultimately happen to her, like how this will end up for her, wasn't there. My Goodreads review is like, I'm by no means anti-slow not a lot happens books, but to me this really felt like 200 pages of why Eileen's dad sucks and 40 pages of wow, this woman I just met is so cool. It happens over a really quick time period. It happens over, like, the course of a week, like the present day moment, but because we're constantly getting these retrospectives and these, like, forward, like, it's just very slow. The frustrating thing is the actual concept. Like, what is the actual concept? What is at the core of a book? The plot. The surface level plot that happens with Rebecca and the kind of themes and the questions that brings out was really interesting. I think Rebecca as a character was really interesting, and I think the way that was done was really well done. I'm trying not to spoil things because so little does happen in this book, it's really easy to spoil it. But the way she handled that, like the structure of it and the way she presented that to us was really well done. I don't think she could have done it any other way. But then I don't think that's what, like, the crux of what the book is about. I think that's like a fun little and I do think it's really important to the book. But the main point of the book, I would argue, is Eileen and Rebecca's relationship slash Eileen's personal, like, we're following Eileen's growth because we spend so much of the time just with her without Rebecca. So even as much as I want to say it's like about their relationship, it's not. But then, like I said, I still think you could sit in a class and debate the different choices. Like, why did Otessa Moshfeg decide to have it be so retrospective and to have all these like inserts of what's going on there? Why? Because for me that made me lose motivation. So what did she gain there? I do want to talk about the film a little bit, and I want to talk about the film now before I wrap up my thoughts on the book. Because it's a film, it has to handle things differently. It can't be so introspective, like without doing like that cheesy narration thing. It just doesn't work. And because as well we don't have that internal narration, we can't have it just solely be about like Eileen's journey. It needs to be more about Eileen and Rebecca's relationship. Like, that's the crux of the film. While that's like an important part of the book and what happens with Rebecca is an important part of the book, it's more about, like, I would argue Eileen's journey, because we spend so much time with Eileen without Rebecca, without anyone else. Albeit a lot of it is about Eileen fantasizing Rebecca, but I would argue that's more of a reflection on Eileen than it is Rebecca. Whereas the film, we can't have that much time with Eileen just now. And like, it is a lot about Eileen's growth, and we do have moments with just her, but so much of it is fueled by Rebecca because she's the inciting, she's the thing that changes things. And so she comes in way sooner. I do think on the whole I enjoyed the film much more than the book. I think it might be one of these instances where the film probably did it better. There were one or two decisions that were made towards the end. One of the great things about this book is the ambiguity of their relationship. I don't want to get too much into it because spoilers, or maybe this would be a spoiler section. If you've not read the book and watched the film, you don't want to hear these spoilers, then mute the screen until the writing leaves. But in the book, we never really know if Eileen wants to be Rebecca or if she wants to be with Rebecca. And like, there's all these different like facets of what this relationship really could be. Like, maybe it's a mother figure, maybe they are just friends. Was Rebecca using Eileen? Was Eileen using Rebecca? None of this is ever like outright explained away. Like, I think there's arguments for multiple of these interpretations. Whereas in the film, Eileen comes right out and says, "I love you, Rebecca." Like, it's not quite, it's a little more clear cut. And I think there still is that, like, a level of that ambiguity. I just wish she had just that one line. I just wish that one line wasn't there. And like, in the end, Eileen knew Rebecca wasn't coming in the book, and she had like a level of clear-headedness. As soon as she went into that house, she like understood things aren't right here. She wanted to leave much sooner, versus in the film she was just like so obsessed with Rebecca that she didn't even have that level of objectivity anymore, which again I think lends credence to the fact that like, the film's more about their relationship and the book's more about like Eileen. I mean, there were some other differences in the film in regards to like some of the events that were retrospective in the book happened present day in the film, but like that made sense, like it had to be that way, I feel like. And I think it changed things a little bit, but nothing overly bothered me apart from this, like that one line I went on about in the spoiler section. I think on the whole the film feels much stronger. I think just having it be about their relationship, and it still is a lot about Eileen, and it still is a lot about like what Rebecca brought to the table, but I think it just made for a much stronger. And just like the fact that we didn't have to listen to Eileen's wallowing just made it that so much more bearable. I think the relationship with Eileen and her father is really interesting in both versions. The ending is different in the film, like the ultimate ending. I'm pretty sure, I don't have the book as you can tell, so I can't like reference it and like double check for you, but I'm like 90% sure that the way the book and the film like ultimately ends are different. I think I prefer the book ending. I think the film ending makes Eileen a little more redeemable, and I think that Eileen the film, Eileen's a little bit less of an unlikable character. I think she's a little more unlikable in the book, but at the same time I can like totally understand why she's the way that she is. Like, I by no means like hated her. Apparently the thing with the Otessa Moshfeg's books is they're all really gross, and so I'm a little hesitant to go into any more of her books because I get the ick easily. Yeah, so I think on the whole I'd give Eileen, it's like I want to give it like a 6 out of like how much I enjoyed it, but I rambled on about it for a little while here. Like, that film would have never happened and I couldn't have had that in-depth conversation about the film if the book never existed. So I feel like I should at least give it a 7. I gave it 2 stars on Goodreads. I don't know. Editing me can decide. She will tell you what I ultimately think. It's somewhere between like a 6 and a 7. Though I feel like it might fluctuate over time. I think the film would be more like of an 8. I really enjoyed the film. Yeah, that's Eileen. It's funny because I just read The Green Hollow duology. I really wanted like cozy fantasies, but I had to read Eileen for the film. It was such a tonal change. Next up is it's a big ol' one. It's the crux of what I read this month. And that is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I've been wanting to read this book for so long, but I was so intimidated by it. I might, you know, just put it here. Can you see it there? I don't know if I can hold it for you. It's heavy. It's high fantasy, it's got queer relationships, we've got like a range of different perspectives. That's like what I knew. I knew that there was like at least a sapphic element to it, and it was high fantasy with dragons. When you read like the inside flap, when you read the synopsis, when you know, you've not read the book, you don't actually know the world system, it is a bit like reading something in a foreign language. Without like going on and on too much, like trying to explain to you what it's about, because it is like, you just have to read it, and it doesn't take you very long to get grips. Like it is, because it's so long, the world building I feel like is constant throughout the book. Like all of the dark blue tabs are world building, so you can see like it's pretty spread out, but it only takes like 100 or so pages for you to feel like comfortable in the world. So we live in a world where there are dragons. There are dragons and there are worms, and dragons originate from the east and worms originate from the west. A long time ago, there was this big bad worm called the Nameless One, and he tried to end the world, but they managed to seal him back up. The world went on, and there's a really interesting element to this book is there's like religions started up about like the big bad worm and like who defeated him, and it's really interesting because we read from different perspectives of people across the map. They're all their different takes on it and all their different like interpretations and the prejudice they bring to the table. After this big war with this big bad worm called the Nameless One, the East and the West, they stopped talking to each other so much, and over time the West developed this grudge towards the East, the fact that the East have these dragons that are similar to worms but not the same. Their magic works very differently. Like the West calls the East worm worshippers because they forget that dragons are different to worms, and the fact that they like worship these creatures no less, like it really just rubs them the wrong way. Whereas like in the East, they really respect these creatures and they work alongside them, and they just have very different lifestyles. They have very different religions. Kind of, they're really not on good terms. So like I said, we follow 4 different characters, 2 in the East and 2 in the West. And we have like a nice range of perspectives as well. Like in the East, one of them is an older man who's an alchemist. We have a young woman who's learning to be a dragon rider, which is really exciting. And in the West, we have like a court member, I'm gonna call him, who's not too adventurous. He's used to life at court, but he does get thrust into adventure nonetheless. We also have Jade, and Jade is our main character, I would argue. Spend the most time with her because she is in court with a queen of the West. I think it's Innis is the name of her country, and so we're following like court life with her a lot, and this queendom is really linked, hardcore linked to the religion of the people that captured the Nameless One. And so there's a lot of like backstory and religion. Jade is actually from the south though, so like if Innis is up here, Jade comes from down here, and so she comes from a completely different belief system. She has magic. She's from the Priory of the Orange Tree, where the book gets its name from, and like I said, as the book goes on, all is explained. It's all interlinked in this really wonderful, really in-depth, fascinating way, and the way you slowly learn the pieces of the puzzle, there's loads of riddles. It's just so fun to watch it all play out. It's so well thought out. So if you can't already tell, I really enjoyed this one. I started this like I think November 1st, and I finished it like the 26th or so, like basically the end of the month. I read it like 50 pages at a time, but I never like, I often have this thing where I've been reading for a book for too long. Even if I'm really enjoying it, I just want to get to the end. Like I hate feeling like I'm treading water. But I never had that one, like despite the fact that it's like the only book that I read on an evening. Like all these audiobooks I listened to during the daytime, and then the evening would come and I'd sit and I'd read 50 pages of the Priory. Like it never bothered me. I was always excited to read those 50 pages. I really enjoyed all of it. I really liked the length of it, and a lot of people said, and I knew this, I watched a review like halfway through reading the book and was like, oh no, because I was like, maybe this could be like a new all-time favorite. Like that's how strong I felt about it. But and other people say it's the end. It's a little rushed. It's a little rushed. In particular, it's like the last 70 pages. That last 70 pages needed to be like double the length. If that had happened, then it would probably be 10 out of 10. Like there's just a couple scenes in particular as well. There's an element of training, and then there's like the climax, right? If those two had just been spaced out and like all the rest was like the rushness that it was, that I wouldn't have minded that so much if we just had time for those 2 things. Like that training element, I think we just needed a chapter. We just needed a couple of pages. It could have been reported, it could have been brief. We just needed to see something. Then that big climate, like the whole book you're building to this, and it takes up 2 chapters of this 800-page book. Like it takes up 20 to 40 pages. It's not like, I wanted that to be a good 50 to 100 pages section. And also, because we've got all these different pubs, like I said, we see Eve the most. Where was she? We barely spent any time with her in that section. And like, I understand that we needed to see from this perspective that we did. It was a really interesting perspective. I did like Tane as a character. It's Tane's perspective that we spent most of the time there. Tane is the dragon rider. And I really liked her pub. I just wanted more time with Eve. The amount of time we spent with her for the rest of the book, to like, in that last 70 pages, we barely spent any time with her. What happened there? That wasn't fair. I felt like we were done dirty. That's my only problem though. I think the writing was really beautiful. I do think it's not the strongest fantasy writing I've ever read. There were definitely a few times where like I would forget who was who, or I'd forget like Arlek, what happened to him as well. Like we completely forgot about him. No, he was towards the end. I don't know, I felt like we could have seen what was going on with him in the very end. Arlek is like this magical creature and I kept forgetting what he looked like. But that happened with a few different things. And I don't know whether it was me, whether it's like because I read it over such a long time period, but I don't think so. I think, and it might just be like a subjective thing. I've not heard anyone else talk about this, but for me personally, like details struggle to stick sometimes, and I don't think the writing was like particularly beautiful per se, but it was strong, it was solid, it was easy to read, it was immersive. I would argue that it's still on the whole well done. Characters all felt very real, they felt layered, they felt complicated. I rooted for them so hard. I rooted for their relationship so hard. I just love this world so much. I'm definitely gonna read the prequel. I think I need time to let it sit. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say. I really enjoyed it. I think it was really strong. I cannot wait to read more of what this author writes. And it's so gutting that the end was like that, because like I said, if it wasn't that, it would be perfect. It would be perfect. I'm gonna give it like a 9 out of 10. Did that end annoy me enough to deduct a whole point or just half a point? Either a 9 or a 9.5. I'm gonna give it. And it's so gorgeous. I love this cover, and the cover, the new cover of the Bone Season, I have it down on my shelf. It's in a stack, so I can't pull it out for you. It's here. It's so gorgeous, and the spine is so like magnificent, and I'm really excited to read that series as well. Though it's not completed. I think there's only 3 books, and I think it's gonna be like 6 or 7 books. So that's nerve-wracking. Yeah, those are all my opinions. I liked it a lot. And then the last book that I finished this month was Delicates by Brenna Thumler, the sequel to Sheets. I will leave the video where I talk about Sheets down below so you can get an idea for the premise there. It's to do with ghosties, but they all have really strong like emotional ties to them. I think they might technically be why our characters are teens. The themes are very serious in both, but this one had like, it pivoted at one point and I was like, I didn't know we were like that serious. I love the art style of these so much. I love the color palettes. I think they're really fun. I love Wendell's this little ghost guy. And I think the relationship between, what's our lead character? Marjorie and Wendell's really interesting, and I think it was inevitable. And I think Marjorie's journey as a whole was really interesting. I don't know, I just didn't enjoy this one as much. I didn't connect to the story as much. But then I also remember like feeling like slightly, after finishing Sheets, I felt like slightly anticlimactic after all the hype I'd heard about it. I don't know. I don't know if I'm obsessed with this series, but I really like the art style, and I like it enough to keep reading it. I know there's a 3rd book in this series. I think it's a trilogy. It didn't stand out to me too much, this one. I'd probably give it like a 6.5 or a 7, just because I don't have that much like personal attachment to it. I did also read like the first half of Inkblood, Sister Scribe. I just want to mention it because I felt like I'd read a significant portion of it, and then when like I looked at the bookmark, I was like, oh, I'm not actually that far in. I thought I was going to finish this by the end of the month, but this will be in my December wrap up. And those are all the books that I read in November. I would love to hear what you read in November. If you've read any of these and you have any opinions, I'd love to hear about them in the comment section below. But that is all I have for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing morning, afternoon, evening / night. My name's Jade. I hope I see you again next time. Goodbye!